I remember the exact moment everything changed. Not because there was shouting, not because something dramatic happened. No, it was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed when life looks deceptively peaceful and then cracks in half. The sky outside was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel muffled. I was curled on the couch in our sunroom, thumbing through design samples for our Charleston condo. Michael, my husband of 11 years, had stepped out for what he called a quick client coffee. Nothing unusual. He'd been meeting more clients lately, especially since expanding his business portfolio. At least that's what he told me. We had built a good life, or so, I thought. A beautiful home, in Atlanta weekend getaways to our Charleston property, luxury cars, a joint consulting business that we started from scratch. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, safe, solid. Or I was. In the background, Baxter, our golden retriever, was sprawled out in a warm patch of sun, snoring lightly. I remember watching his tail twitch and feeling absurdly content. I wish I could freeze that moment. Not because it was special, but because it was the last moment I was still naive enough to believe my life was intact. I got up to grab my planner from our shared home office. I had some budget notes I wanted to review before our upcoming property taxes hit. Michael usually handled that stuff, but lately I'd felt the urge to double-check things. Not because I suspected anything, just instinct. That instinct saved my life. The office was a controlled mess, papers, stacked folders, half-filed Post-its clinging to surfaces like ivy. I reached for the finance binder on the desk and knocked over a loose stack of documents. A yellow legal pad slid onto the floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was covered in Michael's handwriting. I almost put it back until I saw what was scrawled in bold black ink at the top of the page: Divorce Strategy, Q3 Timeline. My heart stuttered. At first I stared, thinking maybe it was part of a client consultation. Michael occasionally helped friends or family navigate tricky legal matters. Maybe this was a draft A mock-up, but the next line crushed that hope. Wait until Shelby's Q2 bonus hits joint account. Estimated May 27th. Shelby. That's me. My name. In ink. I sat down slowly, the pad in my hand. Each bullet point read like a betrayal sharpened to a knife. Consult with Brandon on asset protection options. Begin process of moving Atlanta house into private trust. Delay serving papers until after vacation, avoid suspicion. Rework prenup interpretation. Wash Mitchell loop in firm counsel. Play amicable narrative. Avoid making her defensive. Keep Baxter for optics. That last line, keep Baxter for optics, somehow hit harder than all the others. Baxter. Our dog. Our baby. I flipped to the next page. There were diagrams, charts, a list of our shared assets, some underlined, some circled. Shelby's retirement account, transfer expected $96K, brokerage holdings, $230K joint, try to settle before split. Business shares, argue 70-30 split due to primary effort. My hands were shaking. I flipped back, hoping, begging for some kind of explanation. A scribble that said, just thinking out loud. A sarcastic line. Something. But then I saw it. Taped to the back of the pad was a Post-it note. Don't leave this out again. Hide with legal docs. His handwriting. He hadn't meant for me to see this. He hadn't even meant for me to know, not until it was too late. I should have cried. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold it straight. I took photos of every page, every word, every number. I checked the pad, the desk drawers, the recycling bin. Anything I could quietly collect, I did. And when I was done, I gently slid everything back into place. Like I hadn't seen anything. Like I hadn't just watched my future being pre-cut into neat little legal slices. Then I walked into the kitchen. made a cup of tea, sat back in the sunroom, and waited. When Michael came home 30 minutes later, he was all smiles. He kissed my forehead like he hadn't just planned to emotionally bankrupt me. "How's the design board coming along?" he asked, reaching for Baxter's ears. "Coming together," I said, softly smiling. If he noticed anything off, he didn't show it. He poured himself a bourbon, leaned on the kitchen counter, and began talking about some possible private client work in San Diego, how it might require travel in June. I nodded and asked questions, the same way I always did, the same way a good, trusting wife would. But something inside me had shifted. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was clarity. Michael thought he had the upper hand, that I'd play right into his carefully choreographed scheme, that he'd blindside me, walk away with everything we'd built, and serve it to himself like a victory meal. What he didn't know, what he would never suspect, was that I had just read the entire playbook. And he had grossly underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect myself. In the days that followed, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same, Shelby, smiling attentive, asking Michael about his day, showing him new tile samples for the Charleston bathroom remodel, pouring his favorite scotch on the rocks. But behind my eyes, everything had changed. At night, I reviewed the photos I'd taken of his divorce strategy, every page, every bullet point, every underlined asset. The handwriting was unmistakably his. His planning wasn't a whim. It was meticulous, cold, and designed to trap me in comfort until the very last second. But I wasn't going to sit around and wait for him to strike. First, I went looking for more proof. I knew that in order to protect myself and strike back when the time was right, I needed a clear picture of what he had already set in motion. I couldn't just rely on that yellow pad. I needed to know how far he'd gone, how much he'd already taken, and most importantly, who else might be involved. I started with the home office. Michael and I shared it, but truthfully, I used it far less than he did. He had claimed one of the drawers as his private workspace, and I had respected that until now. One quiet afternoon, when he stepped out to take a call on the deck, I slipped in and opened his drawer. Inside, I found what I was expecting: folders labeled Clients, Tax, Investments. But tucked beneath them, under a loose divider, was a red envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside were copies of financial statements, not just ours, but personal accounts I'd never seen before. Michael had opened a new checking account in his name only at a different bank, one I had no connection to. He had been slowly transferring money, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, from our joint account over the past few months. The statements showed a balance that had grown to over $68,000. That money was supposed to be part of our emergency fund, the same account we'd agreed never to touch without discussing it. My stomach turned. This wasn't just divorce planning. This was stealthy financial betrayal. I took photos of everything. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from focus. The next day, I took the riskier step. I logged into our cloud storage, the one we use to back up our business contracts and property records. We both had access, but Michael was the one who managed the folders. I found a new folder marked Private Documents Reed, locked with a password. I tried a few obvious ones: his birthday, his favorite car, Baxter's name. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something during our last anniversary trip to Asheville. Michael had joked that his favorite password was always the one that got away. I typed Shelby 2010. The folder unlocked. Inside were PDF scans of legal documents, drafts of a separation agreement, a proposed split of business assets, a request for mediation services from a firm based in Charleston. I scrolled through one draft. He had dated the proposal for 2 weeks after our planned vacation in Florida. He had even written a suggested script for how he'd break the news to me after returning home. "Shelby, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I still care deeply about you, but I think we've grown apart. I believe it would be best for both of us if we ended our marriage with respect and kindness. I stared at the sentence. Respect and kindness. As if kindness had anything to do with secret accounts, hidden timelines, and manipulating me into depositing my quarterly bonus into our joint account before initiating the split. I felt the heat rising behind my eyes. No, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to counterattack with strategy. I started documenting everything in a new digital journal on a hidden drive. Timeline of activity, transfers, copies of documents, passwords, phone records. I even began forwarding suspicious emails to a separate Gmail account I had created under a fake name. Michael always underestimated how tech-savvy I was, but I knew I needed help. Not from friends, not yet. From a lawyer, a real one. I reached out to a discreet attorney named Jacqueline Pierce, a referral from a former client of mine who had gone through a high-net-worth divorce and come out thriving. Jacqueline didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't blink when I described the documents I'd found. Instead, she asked a single question. Do you want to play defense or offense? I smiled for the first time in days. Offense. Jacqueline laid out a plan we would quietly begin the process of securing my personal assets and monitoring account activity. The goal wasn't to accuse Michael yet, but to preemptively shield myself from his inevitable ambush. Over the next several days, we opened new personal accounts in my name, only moved my half of our liquid assets, and placed protective holds on my retirement portfolio. We began reviewing the prenuptial agreement line by line, identifying vulnerabilities. Jacqueline had seen it all before. Your husband is smart, she said, but he's not smarter than a woman with motivation and evidence. That's the worst kind of adversary. The final piece came unexpectedly. While backing up some of our older shared files, I found an email buried in an old inbox, a forwarded message from a real estate broker in Charleston. The subject line read, New condo listing under trust ID. Please confirm you and client MR will move forward by Monday. There was a signed offer attached. Michael had put an offer on a new unit, in his name, alone. He was planning to move immediately after the divorce papers were served. All this time, I'd thought we were designing that beach condo together, choosing furniture, picking out backsplash, dreaming of summer. In reality, he was planning a new life alone, using money he'd stolen from under my nose in a property I wouldn't even have the right to walk into. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It wasn't even about the divorce anymore. It was about contempt, the belief that I'd never figure it out, or worse, that I wouldn't be strong enough to fight back. That was his greatest mistake. Revenge is often loud in movies. Screaming matches, shattered glass, scandalous exposures. In real life, the most devastating revenge is quiet. It's paperwork, timing, precision. I wasn't going to scream at Michael. I wasn't going to confront him crying on the kitchen floor. I wasn't going to beg. Instead, I was going to follow his playbook and outplay him at his own game. The first step was keeping up the act. I became the best version of the wife he thought I was, maybe even better. Warm, patient, accommodating. I scheduled dinners, suggested we revisit Italy for our anniversary, and even asked his opinion on how to invest part of my quarterly bonus. His ego made it easy. He thought he was winning. He smiled more, got cockier, left his phone out on the counter again like he used to. That was his second mistake. He was planning a coordinated attack. What he didn't know was I was already at war. With the help of Jacqueline, my attorney, and a financial forensic analyst, she recommended I began shifting my own assets. We created a personal holding trust in my name and rerouted my bonus payment to it. Jacqueline filed preemptive separation paperwork sealed under a protective legal strategy that allowed me to maintain control without tipping Michael off. I also pulled back from our business. quietly. I froze 3 internal processes at the consulting firm, justified as internal review measures, which meant Michael couldn't move any large amounts or sell shares without board-level signatures. I also alerted our co-founder Rachel that I was auditing recent financial transactions due to suspicious inconsistencies. Rachel and I had always been close. She didn't ask questions, she just nodded. By the time Michael would notice anything off, it would already be too late. The next move, leverage. Michael thought he was the only one holding cards. But I had the ultimate wild card. I knew everything, and he didn't know I knew. I set up an anonymous tip to his firm's compliance office using a secure legal channel, flagging him for potential self-dealing and undisclosed financial movements. The documents Jacqueline helped me gather included just enough detail to trigger an internal audit. Within 72 hours, his firm froze his access to certain accounts pending routine compliance review. He came home annoyed, but not panicked. Some idiot flagged an old investment under my name. Probably nothing, he muttered. I offered him a glass of wine and said, "Sounds annoying. Want me to call Rachel and ask if she can rush your side of the budget report? Maybe it'll help get the heat off." He smiled at me like I was still on his side. Third mistake. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. I went into the kitchen to make tea and found Michael still awake, sitting in the living room in the dark, scrolling through his laptop. I stood quietly unnoticed behind the corner of the wall. He was reviewing emails from our firm's cloud, searching for terms like trust account separation, Pierce law. He was catching on, but he was too late. Because that very morning, I had walked into Mitchell & Burke, a notary in downtown Atlanta, and signed something Michael never thought I had the guts or power to do: a temporary marital asset protection injunction. It was a rarely used but fully legal tool in Georgia state law that allowed a spouse to freeze mutual asset liquidation for 10 business days pending arbitration, especially when there was clear evidence of hidden financial movement or bad faith. I submitted Michael's documents, email prints, and financial activity logs. The court granted the order that same day. He couldn't sell, transfer cash out, or move anything without my consent until a legal review concluded. He didn't know that yet, but he was about to find out. It all came to a head the next Friday. He was standing in the kitchen packing his briefcase, clearly anxious. He looked at me. "Hey, weird thing. One of our business accounts is restricted. Have you been messing around with admin permissions?" I smiled. "Not that I know of. Maybe check with compliance." He frowned. "It's not just that. I got a notice from our bank, too. Something about a freeze order." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's strange," I said. "Want me to call Jacqueline Pierce?" "Maybe she can help sort it out." He froze. I could see it in his face. The name hit like a grenade. He set his briefcase down. "Shelby, what's going on?" I placed my cup down carefully. "You tell me," I said, my voice low. "You're the one who made a 10-point plan to divorce me after I deposited my bonus." Silence. I let it hang. Then I added, "You're the one who opened new accounts in your name, transferred joint funds without disclosure, drafted fake equity splits behind my back, and offered on a property with stolen money. So maybe you should be asking yourself what's going on." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked so small in that moment, so far from the man I had once built a life with. "Shelby," he said. Finally, "you don't understand the full picture." "No," I said, "you don't. You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I wouldn't protect myself. You thought you were dealing with the same woman who believed every word you said." I stepped closer. "She's gone." Then I handed him a folder. Inside was a formal notice I was initiating legal arbitration for asset division on my terms. He stared at it. "You can't do this." I raised an eyebrow. I already have. That night, I slept like a stone. Not because the war was over, but because I had claimed the first, most important victory I had taken back power. Michael would still try to wriggle out of it. He'd lawyer up, lie, maybe even twist things to paint himself as a victim. But it wouldn't matter. I had the evidence, the legal footing, the protection, and more importantly, I had the truth while he only had a shredded illusion of control. The hardest part wasn't the lies. It wasn't the secret bank accounts, or the condo he tried to buy behind my back, or the way he smiled at me while planning my erasure. No. The hardest part was realizing that someone I loved deeply, truly, without hesitation, had stopped loving me, not in a moment, but in 1,000 silent decisions that he never thought I'd notice. And I hadn't. Not until it was too late. Or maybe not until it was almost too late. The week after I handed Michael the folder was surreal. He didn't try to fight. Not right away. He stayed at a hotel, said he needed space to think. We agreed to no contact for a few days as the lawyers took over. For the first time in over a decade, I had the entire house to myself. And I hated it. I hated how quiet it was, how every room still smelled like him, how his toothbrush was still by the sink, how Baxter kept wandering the halls looking for him. I tried to tell myself, this is good, this is peace, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like grief, because that's what it was. You don't just lose a husband in a divorce. You lose a version of yourself. A history, a language, inside jokes, private rituals, morning routines, movie preferences, conversations spoken with glances. I stood in the closet staring at our clothes, his suits, his travel bags, and realized I didn't know what was worse, that he was gone, or that I no longer wanted him to stay. 3 days later, I got a letter. A physical one. No email, no text. Just a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox with my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a 2-page letter from Michael. It began with Shelby. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but there are things I need to say. I almost ripped it up. But something in me said, read it. Even if it's awful. Read it. And it was. Not because it was cruel, but because it was full of half-hearted regret, carefully worded deflections, and desperate nostalgia. We both knew things were off. You threw yourself into work. I felt alone. The spark faded. Jessica, she wasn't the plan. She was an escape. She listened. She admired me. I needed to feel seen again. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stay in something that didn't feel like love anymore. No apology, just explanations. Excuses. But the line that stuck with me was the last, you didn't deserve any of this. But neither of us deserved to feel invisible. I folded the letter and put it in the fireplace. Lit a match. Watched the flames curl around his words. He wanted to justify himself. But the truth was simple. He chose betrayal, and I had chosen myself. That night, I sat on the back porch with Baxter wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea and staring out at the lake. The air was still. A few frogs croaked in the distance, crickets, wind through trees. I thought about our first night in this house. We were in our late 20s. We didn't have much furniture. Just a mattress on the floor, 2 mismatched lamps, and a dog bed for Baxter. We drank wine from coffee mugs and danced in our socks to John Mayer. We'd been happy. I don't think he was lying back then. I think we really loved each other. But love isn't always enough. Not when pride creeps in. When ego outweighs honesty. When one person starts seeing the other not as a partner, but as an obstacle to a different life. And Michael. He didn't just fall out of love. He stopped respecting me. That was the deepest cut of all. A week later, we sat across from each other in a law office conference room for the formal mediation meeting. He looked tired. He wore the same blue suit I had helped him pick out for his first investor pitch. I wondered if he chose it deliberately, some quiet attempt to remind me of better times. He barely looked at me. His lawyer did most of the talking. But when we broke for lunch, he approached. "Shelby, can I just say something I didn't answer?" He took that as a yes. "I know I handled everything horribly, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I just wanted you to know I did love you. I just lost sight of it." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "You didn't lose sight?" You looked away, and I walked out of the room. I spent the next few weeks finalizing the legal process. Jacqueline ensured my assets were protected. Our firm's equity was split in my favor. The Charleston condo deal was flagged and canceled due to improper funding. His firm kept him under review for ethics violations. But none of it made me feel triumphant. Because winning in court doesn't undo the loneliness. It doesn't erase the nights you whispered secrets to someone who was already writing you out of their future. Healing doesn't come from justice alone. It comes from reclaiming who you were before the lie took root. So I started over. I took time off from work, traveled to Sedona, then Italy, then stayed at a lakeside cabin in Vermont and watched the leaves fall like gold. I journaled every day, went to therapy, reconnected with friends I had pulled away from during the final years of the marriage. I laughed again, really laughed, for the first time in months. And one morning I woke up and realized I didn't miss him. I missed who I was before him. And that woman. She was finally coming back. It's strange how life can break your heart and sharpen your instincts at the same time. I didn't just survive my husband's betrayal. I outmaneuvered it. Not with revenge, but with clarity, calm, and control. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Always pay attention. No matter how stable your relationship feels, stay awake. Love shouldn't require blind trust. Trust should be earned and checked. Protect yourself. Know your accounts. Know your assets. Have your own. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you strong. And never assume silence means safety. Betrayal often comes dressed in routine, in soft smiles, in perfectly planned weekends. But lies don't hide forever. Michael planned to leave me with nothing. Instead, I walked away with everything that mattered: my self-respect, my independence, and the proof that no one can dismantle me in secret again. So if you're feeling uneasy in your relationship, if something feels off but you can't explain why, don't wait for confirmation to start protecting yourself. You don't owe anyone blind loyalty. You owe yourself the truth. Trust is powerful, but only when paired with vigilance. Be kind, be loving, but above all, be prepared. You never know who's planning their exit while smiling at the dinner table.